Hello, everybody. My name's Tamsin Dillon, and welcome to the SVA and the Artists Roundtable, which is part of the Curatorial Practice program at the School of Visual Arts here in New York. The program complements the Curatorial Roundtable run by Stephen Henry Madoff, where he invites esteemed curators from across the globe to share their experience and knowledge. Here, we're looking at the work of an international range of distinguished artists who are making some of the most relevant and thought-provoking work today, inviting them to talk about the evolution of their work, their current focus and projects, and also how curating has played a role through their relationship with curators in their work, and also working in some cases as curators themselves, and how that relates to their artistic practice in general. This is an introduction to the talk that I held with, where I invited Goshka Macuga to join us. And I'm recording a separate introduction because we had some technical issues that day, and the recording didn't start until halfway through Goshka's presentation. So just wanted to make sense of this for you. Just to say a little bit about Goshka Macuga. She's a London-based artist, originally from Poland, known for her research-intensive and interdisciplinary practice that somehow combines the roles of artist, curator, as well as historian and other kinds of areas of practice. She creates installations, sculptures, tapestries, and collages. And through doing these works, she questions how history is constructed and presented by institutions. Often she mines institutional archives and incorporates works by other artists, blurring the lines between art making and curatorial practice. She frequently engages with themes of power, politics, and historical narratives, with a particular interest in institutional histories and moments of social change. Her experience growing up in post-war Poland has given her a unique perspective on examining communism and complicating historical narratives. She has a broad and deep engagement with modernism, which she developed at art school, where she only learned up until the 60s, as she was growing up in the Eastern Bloc. So, what was happening at the start of the 20th century, modern technology, and also areas such as spirituality. And I think she sees a kind of parallel with what happened in 1989 with the fall of the Berlin Wall. She I would say that her work extends beyond the scope of a single artist and into curatorial practice, exhibition design, and as well as historical inquiry, as I've said. And she's in recent years, some of the works I've seen that have been fascinating include modern jacquard tapestries that may depict a collage of historical photographs, commenting on the relationship between documentation and truth. She's been presented in many places across the globe, so her international roster of exhibitions include solo and group shows here in the US. I was delighted to see her show Andrew Kreps last year, and a major solo exhibition to the Son of Man Who Ate the Scroll, a solo exhibition that was at the Fondazione Prada in Milan. She was also in Documenta 13. Um, She's been shown at the Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago, at the Whitechapel Gallery in London. She was a Turner Prize nominee in 2008, and her work is featured in numerous public collections, including the Museum of Modern Art here in New York, Tate London, the Broad Los Angeles, Walker Art Center Minneapolis, and just to name a few. And we're going to be joining Macuga sort of halfway through her presentation, as I said. And unfortunately, we missed quite an interesting beginning where she talks about how she started working with many other artists in London during the 1990s and curating small shows in her own apartment, her own flat in London, with a whole range of other artists. That it was a way of taking control themselves of rather than waiting to be found and to be curated into exhibitions. And I think she was halfway through talking about a major project in this presentation, so we'll join her right there. And apologies for the technical problems that this created, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the talk.
So with the permission of Picasso, the work came to the Whitechapel for 2 weeks, and it hosted many political events. So actually what you are seeing here is the installation. I can go back to it because these are more the references. That's the installation as such. Sorry, this is other materials. I'm just going to jump up and go back again. Okay, so this is a little bit more about the archive, and that has been reprinted. So everybody could come and visit the show. It was open for 2 weeks, and essentially what they did, they collected shoes and money to support Spanish Civil War. And also lots of people actually joined the fight against fascism in Spain after this event. Sorry, so for example, this man here with the stick was still one of the members of International Brigade who went to Spain. There was a lot of people that kind of were really attracted by this event and this whole exhibition, and there was really plenty of time that people could go back to it and participate in it. But, okay, so let's go back to, okay, so this is what I wanted to find. So this is how the Guernica was actually exhibited in 1939. So you see kind of one of the meetings with the leader of the Communist Party, and Guernica was literally shown like a banner at the back. There were different meetings taking place. There were also different protests taking place outside. The other things that I found in the archive of Whitechapel, sorry, I have to go back to the right point, were also the materials that were kind of very much showing the spirit of that era of the 30s. So for example, the Whitechapel Gallery was doing workshops and teaching people how to do propaganda. So around that same time when people were protesting and kind of joining together, helping the cause against fascism, there were also ways of learning how to actually activate the engagement. This is another part of the archive, which was then referring to attempts of bringing the Guernica in the 50s by different directors of the Whitechapel and not having really much success then, because of course it was the time where this kind of association with communism, this area being communist, wasn't necessarily helping with, for example, bringing loans from United States. So you can see here there is a letter to Museum of Modern Art, but there were also letters directed to the American embassy, and kind of they were facing this impossibility of not being able to do a Picasso show. So with that history, I collected all the info about sort of everything that surrounded the display of Picasso's work, including its presence in the international exhibition in Paris in 1937. So you can see here in the bottom, this is how Guernica was first exhibited in Paris. In front of this, you had Calder's Mercury Fountain. Upstairs, there were films which were kind of informative about the war in Spain. And of course, at the same time, you had all the other pavilions, which were kind of promoting different ideologies coexisting within each other, including fascism, communism. So, everybody sort of went to Paris and kind of created propaganda around their own agendas. So when I found this information about Guernica and the events of 1937, I thought that it was such a brilliant event and so completely memorable, and not many people knew about it, that I decided to devote my commission time into a show which somehow related to that time, with the kind of aspiration of leaping this time into much more contemporary context. Of course, the big challenge was about how do you substitute Guernica with another work? Like, how do you find an object which has the same strength and the message? And of course, it wasn't very easy, because of course I knew that Guernica cannot come back we cannot go anywhere from Madrid. And for a long time, I was really looking into this. And then I came across imagery and information about the events which surrounded Colin Powell's presentation in 2003. No, 2000, sorry. I think that it's 2000. Anyway, I will verify this. And then I found out that in this space here, where Colin Powell had a press conference, which in usual circumstances, this object was hanging next to it, I discovered that it was a copy of Guernica, pretty much the exact copy in the same scale, which was commissioned by Nelson Rockefeller and reproduced here in the French workshop of Madame d'Orbach. Actually, there were 3 copies made in the 50s with the permission of Picasso, and one of them, commissioned by Nelson Rockefeller, was given to the UN as a permanent loan and deterrent of war. During the speech of Colin Powell, they decided to cover this with this blue cloth, with the excuse of the work being too graphic and maybe too interfering, with the kind of intents of how they wanted to present themselves. But of course, we know that the reason of this was that you don't really want to speak about the sort of trying to get the UN to back up the war in Iraq and having such a symbolic work at the back. And of course, lots of people were sort of raving about it then, but I didn't really come across many articles at the time in the UK. I found it online. And I thought that this was really a perfect work to, in a way, use to bridge this history of Spanish Civil War with the much more contemporary context of Iraq war or Afghan war. So after long hesitation, I spoke to Ivona Blaswick, and she basically made contact with the UN through the American embassy, asking about the loan of this work and if we could have it for a year of duration, for the duration of my show. And surprisingly, we were allowed to borrow it for 1 year with the permission of the widow of Rockefeller. And it was shipped here in very special conditions, and it was displayed as you see it here. The Calder Mercury fountain was replaced with this round table, which was displaying all the archival references that I mentioned to you before. And the piece was open for 1 year to different meetings. So basically, when I had the opening of the exhibition, I was able to sort of promote in the press that I could one could use this for meetings as long as one would give leave some kind of memory of these meetings and some kind of specification and photographic documentation. And over the period of 1 year, maybe about 100 meetings took place. I will show you some photographs from that.
I was just going to say, Goshka, if I could just quickly jump in, we're close to the hour, but I was
Yes,
thinking, given that we started so late, maybe we can continue on for
to the
10
next
minutes.
thing.
But yeah, is there something? Maybe there's a couple of things you could talk about. I mean, it's been great to hear about this project
Yes.
in
Well,
detail. It's really, really important, and especially also to hear how you started your practice very much with this display of working with other artists, and somehow this continues in this project here. But it'd be great to maybe hear about one or two other things over if you can talk. Oh, look, some key figures there. Very quickly about them. And in the meantime, if people have questions, to quickly drop them in the Q&A, and we can go on until, say, 10 past before we have to close to go and have our seminar with the students. How does that sound?
Yes. So shall I quickly maybe browse through what I prepared and what we won't have time to see? Because basically, as you can see, the shows become much more elaborate and maybe complex. So here it's a show which happened in 2016 at Fondazione Prada in Milan. And here you can really see the kind of exercise of the curatorial aspect of my work, where I create narratives, but essentially I borrow a lot of works. And I don't know if we don't have time to get into each work, but that show consisted of this space. I made also a robot which kind of was summarizing response to the kind of information span, which in a way fed into all these different parts of the installation. Here also we have plenty of loans, including MoMA, Louvre, and private collections. But
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, the loans process that you have to go through because of your desire to include these works in your installations. How complex is that for you, or is it always through the institution that you're working with? What, have you had any difficulties with that side of the exhibitions?
Well, so I clearly wouldn't be able to borrow these works from MoMA. I mean, if I didn't have a sort of powerful institution which can fulfill all the safety and kind of conservation requirements, there is no way that you can even dream of having this kind of work. So maybe, at this stage, the possibilities of having the works for a temporary period of time, give me more flexibility of what I can have. And in the right place, you really can have anything you want. Maybe not Guernica, but you can borrow quite a lot of amazing stuff and include it in the narrative that you're trying to create. So, this was, for example, a piece that was from Louvre. So this installation, for this, I created the tables, and then I created the scrolls, which were drawn by the robots. And on the last table, there were drawn lives. But it was basically about the beginnings and ends of humanity. So there was quite a big, the speech of the robot downstairs, which you already saw, was reflecting the same material. It took me 2 years maybe to collect different references, texts, and then exercise the abilities of using this material to create different bodies of work. So we've got this room, and then we also had other, so this is still the same show, the same space. But then, for example, the same sort of material went into this work, which was also fueled by another kind of interesting discovery, which was an organization existing between 20s and 40s called International Institute of Intellectual Cooperation, and Einstein was a member of it, but it was an institution which was trying to again respond to problems of war and proposed the idea of intellectual leadership replacing political leadership. So Einstein was trying to reach out to a lot of thinkers such as Marie Curie, Skłodowska, Freud, and trying to open a dialogue that would be sort of feeding that possibility. And I did something that was a little bit stepping out of it into a kind of work that wasn't specified by any historical brackets. And all the kind of stuff or information that I was using for other works that was represented in philosophical thought or scientific thought in text, here was actually replaced with the representation of people who created them. And I created sculptural work that had these different constellations that were proposing hypothetical meetings of minds that were dealing with certain problems of our time. So, this is basically another, then I translated most of the knowledge used for all of this into this idea of potential futuristic collapse of humanity. And I thought that actually using Esperanto was a very good idea. So I had also a performance that was happening every day, where a lot of texts used previously for all the other works were then read in Esperanto as a language which had this great aspiration about kind of connectivity of the future, but in fact, never really survived up to, current time. So, I was also using loans from Fondazione Prada here, which you see. So, there are different parts of this exhibition, a very elaborate, big exhibition where, again, this kind of different possibilities of working as an artist were present.
One interesting question that's come up, I mean, some of these exhibitions must have had significant budgets. And do you ever get involved in understanding where the funding is coming from, or is that
well, of course I do, and I think that for every artist this is a really big topic. You maybe don't want to be affiliated with people who don't have very good reputation or their money isn't clean. And in this case here, of course, the money comes from a fashion brand, but I think that the Prada Foundation, with the kind of versatile engagement with culture and arts that they have, which is not only based in Milan, but also in Venice and China, and the kind of collaborative processes. I even had an interview with Miuccia Prada last year, or maybe this year, for New York Times. And, it was very much about the kind of political aspect of, how she relates to different topics. And she sort of gave an interesting answer. She said, I represent a commercial fashion brand. And of course, I have difficulties of being outspoken about my politics. But what I do is I create platform for other people to articulate their politics and their belief. And she really does. And, my experience working with her over now quite few years, I have a very positive experience of collaborating with them on many levels.
Yeah.
But of course, that's not, sorry.
That's an ongoing kind of series that you're working on with the Prada Foundation.
Well, I mean, I did mainly projects with them that were art-based, but I also did recently a project with them which was more attached to the brand. And, it was during Basel Fair in Paris. It was kind of like an assisting project during Basel, where I was asked to curate really a big piece, big project, which was commemorating collaborations of Miu Miu now, not Prada itself, with women filmmakers, and up to date already over, I think like last 15 years, they've been commissioning people to make short films. It's women filmmakers. And they wanted me to showcase the whole collection of these films. And of course, it wasn't very easy, to work with film, especially, which gives you great limitation of like spatial sort of display. But I decided to extract different characters from each movie and create a really elaborate performance work. And this piece was also shown in April in New York, again, at the same time as the art fair in this space called, oh God, today I have such a brain fog, sorry, I have to check this.
We'll check.
I told you yesterday what it was. It was,
yes, you did.
It was in Meatpacking District.
What, down near Chelsea?
Yeah.
Well, we'll come up with that. But in the meantime, a couple more questions, and then I think we have to close.
Yes.
One person, sure, this is quite a complex question. I like that your work deals with problems of human condition. I'm curious, in our day and age, about fascism, where technology and surveillance make it more possible, with wars now and Trump. I'm just reading this verbatim. It's an important topic, and there's a lot of name calling of politicians. But I believe our generation, I don't know which generation you're from, Nicholas Toulouse, and Gen X and millennials have no real sense about what fascism really is or what it means. That well may be true, I think. And I was wondering, they were wondering what insights came from your Guernica research. It says at White Cube, but I think they mean Whitechapel. I'm sure you had many insights. Is there one particular thing that came out of that made you think about how people don't know really what fascism is and
I think that there are specifics of how fascism is defined, or because of course the word fascism is being used not just in art and in culture generally, but it's used in sort of politics, and we hear it in different countries, and it's a sort of word that keeps reoccurring over and over again. But I think that, if you think of the definition of this rather than the historical circumstances, so maybe we can draw parallels. I mean, first of all, I think that what is happening now, and I think that this was already maybe it wasn't so present in 2009 when I did the Whitechapel exhibition. Yeah. There is definitely a limitation in freedom of speech, which has been imposed by, not maybe state imposed as such, from an artist perspective, imposed by the institutions that one is affiliated with. So, we cannot really have an opinion because it might be seen problematic in different circumstances and different contexts, different countries, different institutions. So, that's one issue. Then if we think of this as a limitation, that obviously is linked up to politics, I think that there are certain conditions that define fascism. And I think that I've listened even to a podcast which was trying to explain this. And I think that fascism cannot really be applied to religious values in any way. So, anything that it's married to religion is not apparently fascism. Fascism has got, so I think that you can sort of in a way look at the model of the occurrence of fascism initially in the history. But I think that, one has to be really careful of how it's being used today. And I think that I see that a lot of people are using it in relationship to current wars and relationships to institutional politics.
Yeah, interesting. I'm going to move on to a very different question, and I think this might have to be the last one. Do you have a dream collection to work with and create an exhibition from? What would your dream collection be?
Well, so the image that we're looking at now was maybe the dream collection, looking at MoMA, because I made a lot of references to different shows that happened at MoMA over time, or different works. And, when I did this piece, this commission in 2019, it was kind of, an endless resource where you could do really things, your whole life, or the rest of your practice could be dedicated to sort of extracting different information from the MoMA archive, also from the collection and of MoMA, and sort of creating critical propositions for exhibitions. So in a way, I feel like I already had quite great opportunities to work with such things. But then, of course, there are places where, unexplored places, which I haven't had access to, maybe in different continents. For example, recently I traveled to Middle East, and I wasn't in agreements to the kind of rhetoric that was presented by the museum around certain topics that I was sort of looking at, but I was interested in that perspective, in different perspective than the Western perspective. So I think that even going back to Poland, which I visit once a year and I feel very familiar with from my upbringing, the perspective of, for example, colonialism is completely different. It reaches out to territories which were occupied by Soviet Union, but maybe not necessarily having as much affiliation with the sort of post-colonial rhetoric that we are concerned with in the UK or in the US. So I also would quite like to go back to Poland and really focus on this kind of other perspective. So it's sort of more things like that.
That's a great answer, though, Goshka. To go back to the early part of your life and look at things from a different perspective that way. Amazing. I think we have to close, but I just the last comment here, I think hopefully echoes what many other people are thinking, certainly myself. It was such a pleasure to have the opportunity to hear from you. They're based in California, and they're just saying many thank yous for this event.
I'm very sorry about the waste of 20 minutes and a slight, yes.
We've managed to add a little bit on at the end.
Yes.
So now we have to close and go very briefly to our seminar with just the students. Someone's asking if we broadcast the videos. And again, because of the slight technical hitch, I forgot to start the recording until we were well into the talk. So, but you can see, you will still be able to see some of this on the SVA Curatorial Practice website. So there's the answer to that one. But just to say thank you all so much for being with us, and thank you so much, Goshka, for giving us a really quite a small insight into how your mind works, how your practice has developed, and where you're really focusing now. It'd be so interesting to see where it goes from here. And yeah, we'll call it a day there. This is the last talk of this current series. So maybe we'll meet again in the next series of these talks next year. But
excellent. Thanks so much. And then if anybody's interested, I did a podcast with Ben Luke recently, which I think, Tamsin, you heard. So
yes,
there is really maybe, because it's 1.5 hours, so there's much more information in this podcast if anyone is interested in listening. And it's
there are some other things online, but this was great to be in direct conversation with you for a little bit.
Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.
Thanks. Bye. Bye.
See you on the other link.